All right, everyone, thanks for coming. Welcome to this very special Earth Day presentation. I'm really looking forward to this one, as I know you all are. My name is Dana. I'm with the Missouri River Bird Observatory. Also here with me from MRBO is Ethan Duke.
Hi,
Um,
everybody.
tuning in from the lands of the Iroquois and Seneca this evening, actually. Um, the mission here at MRBO is conservation via science, education, and advocacy. This is the very last of our April learning series. We've been doing webinars almost every week since January. And just so folks know, we are probably going to have another webinar series in the fall. So we will let you know all about that. But this evening, we have a very special presentation from Greg Olson. Greg is an independent researcher and author who lives in Columbia, Missouri. He's the author of 7 books and several articles about Native American history in Missouri and the Midwest. The Iowa in Missouri 2008 won the Missouri Humanities Governor's Humanities Award for Distinguished Literary Achievement. His book, Iowa Life, Reservation and Reform, 1837 to 1860, published in 2016, was named a Kansas Notable Book in 2017. His most recent book, Indigenous Missourians, Ancient Societies to the Present, which you can see here on the screen, published in 2023, won the Missouri Conference on History's 2024 Book Award. So we are very pleased and honored to have Greg with us tonight. And Greg, please go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Dana, and thank you for the invitation to come and do this talk, especially on Earth Day. Um, this is the first time I have ever really given a talk like this, and it was a good opportunity for me to kind of think about it. It's a little outside my wheelhouse. I need to start out with a disclaimer or a couple of disclaimers, and the first is um, to let you know that I am not indigenous. My people are European, Swedish, German, British, and but I think as a white male historian, it's important to really look into the past of indigenous Missourians. A lot of what we read, a lot of the history books we read about indigenous Missourians sort of, deal with indigenous people up to say the Civil War or the 1830s, but really only when they were an impediment to settlement. And so my one of my goals is with this book and really all my books is to try to put indigenous people back into the history of Missouri because I think it's really important to do that. And also, too, as tradition would dictate, some of the elders have told me that when giving a talk like this, it's important to begin by asking for your forgiveness beforehand for anything that I might say that might lead you to misunderstand or in a way that I may misrepresent the indigenous people that I'm talking about. Where I do come from is for probably the last 25 years or so, I've done a lot of work with Indigenous people about their history. As Dana read the titles of my book, you would probably can see that I've done a lot of work with the Ioways, and they have a reservation in Kansas and Nebraska, right on the Missouri River. I've worked with some individual Osages over the years and also some Sac and Fox on different historical projects. So, I can only speak from the viewpoint of a white male, but but I've done my best to work with Indigenous people and try to understand a worldview that is really quite different from my own, and that's something that's really going to be I think the center of what we're going to talk about. Um, let's see. I do not do land acknowledgements, mostly because I think they're highly problematic. In my talk, I will talk a lot about the different indigenous people who lived here in Missouri. I live in Columbia, in Boone County, which has been the homeland of so many people over thousands of years, but most recently the Iowa and the Sac and Fox. Um, but I think really for land acknowledgements to have any kind of value, they really need to include some sort of commitment on our part to work closely with Indigenous people in a way that it allows those who used to live here to come back and engage with this land in some sort of meaningful way. So that's my little soapbox there. And so the thing that people really want to know is like who lived in Missouri, when did they live here? I think no matter what topic I'm talking about, Indigenous people, that's always something people want to know. And so I developed this timeline here. I mean, I think when we envision our own history here in the 21st century, we envision, you know, all we really think about generally is the world after Columbus, right? 1492. That's the big history of the United States and North America. But in Missouri, when we're talking about Indigenous people, we have to realize that people have been living here for at least 12,000 years. And I think really we're going to discover that it's been a lot more than 12,000 years. I mean, there's been some archaeological sites here in Missouri that date back at least to 15,000 years. 12,000 years is really the end of the last ice age. And so that date is kind of based on the old theory that we all learned in school about the ice bridge, right? The Bering Strait ice bridge, which has pretty much been debunked at this point. And so I think that opens up the way for us to imagine an Indigenous presence that's been going on for probably far longer than 12,000 years. A lot of Indigenous people, when they talk about their origins, they'll say, we always lived here. I mean, this is where we are from. And I think that more and more we're going to find that while maybe they didn't always live here, they lived here a lot longer than we have in the past given them credit for. And I put in, this is my little red laser pointer here. So here you see up on top, we're going all the way back to 12,000 years, and we go through a lot of different phases. I put in a couple of markers here to sort of give you sort of some milestones about when, you know, when people started building burial mounds, when people started using pottery, and when people started agriculture. But I mean, look, that's only 4,000 years ago. Okay, so there's all this history that predated that. Okay, and then way down here in the very bottom is this little 300-year period of European contact, what I call the period of colonization here in the US. So we think our history is so big and we think that it's, you know, that it's everything, but we need to put it in perspective and understand that people, Indigenous people, have been here interacting with the land long before Europeans were here. So I'm going to go through just kind of 2 or 3 slides here that sort of show you different people that lived here in Missouri. And this first slide shows actually what this is it's burial mounds. And so all these little red dots are burial mounds. And of course, you'll notice that they all appear in river valleys. Okay. Burial mounds, as you can tell, as I mentioned in this previous slide, showed up maybe 3,500 years ago, maybe a little less than 4,000 years ago. And what's interesting is they kind of show you where people live. And so there's a really wide distribution clear through the Midwest here. And then in Missouri, of course, burial mounds show up along the rivers. And there's a lot of reasons for that I think we'll probably talk about more as we go on, why burial mounds show up along rivers. But if you live in Boone County or Lafayette County or Saline County, anywhere here in mid-Missouri, and you are familiar with the Missouri River, you will know that on bluffs over the river, there are, especially in this part of the state, there are hundreds of burial mounds. And most of those are going to date from 3,000 years ago to 1,000 years ago. And we don't really know exactly who these people were, so they were classified as woodland people. And then we're going to go to about 700 or 800 years ago. And it was a really interesting time. Here I have drawn a silhouette of the state of Missouri on this map. And we were kind of situated between a large culture called Oneota. And the Oneotas were more like I would say, I don't want to say that they were transitory because they had permanent towns, but they moved a lot for hunting. You know, they had hunting seasons. They would go out west to hunt buffalo. But that would be nations like the Iowa, the Missouri, the Odo, probably some of the, and those are all Chouette, what we call Chouette Sioux speakers. And then there would be some Degian Sioux speakers too, which would be like Osages, uh, well, not Quapaws, but Ponkas, Omahas, Kaws, people like that. And so they were really kind of decentralized. They lived in small groups all over sort of the plains and the upper Midwest. And then down here in on the east side of the state, we have Mississippian, and probably the most famous Mississippian site that you may have heard of is Cahokia, which is just outside of the state border. It's just across the river from St. Louis. We'll talk about Cahokia a little bit. And this was a much more top-down hierarchical society. Cahokia at one time, this area, the Cahokia sphere of influence probably was home to maybe 15 to 20,000 people, which is more people than, you know, lived in London at the time. So it was a very stable, hierarchical society, much different from the Oneotas. And what's interesting to me is how these two groups really lived pretty much together at the same time, and they even interacted. And I should say that the Mississippians would be your nations like your Choctaws, Chickasaws, a lot of the nations who came from the Southeast United States. Osages claim to have been a part of that, and some people think perhaps members of the what we call the Illinois Confederacy were a part of that as well. But a lot of different groups came together to make this, because after all, you know, if you're going to get 20,000 people together back in that time, you know, you have to think that a lot of different groups came together. And then at the time of first contact, this is pretty much the situation in Missouri. And in Missouri, we consider the time of first European contact to be 1673, because that's when Marquette and Joliet sailed down the Mississippi River. They didn't even get into Missouri, but they sailed down the Mississippi. They did have an extended contact with a Peoria village here, which was part of the Illinois Confederacy. And if you go up to this part of the state, the far northeast part of the state today, you'll know the Illinois State Historic Site or State Park. And I think that was one of the sites that Marquette and Joliet visited. And at the time, there were maybe 8,000 people, 8,000 Peoria people living up there. And then they went on down to visit the Quapaws down in Arkansas. So they never really got into the state of Missouri, but from what they were told and some of the other information we've gathered over the years, this was kind of the layout in Missouri at that time. Now, it was really three big, powerful tribes, sort of. Missouri was a place where they came together. The Missourians are still relatives of the Otos and the Iowas, and also the Winnebagos or Ho-Chunks that live now in Wisconsin. And the Missourians were very powerful. They controlled this Missouri River, and whether you were a white trader or an indigenous trader and you wanted to travel up the Missouri to go upriver, you had to pretty much pay a toll or go through the Missourians. Osages, of course, are the people that we hear the most about. They were a very large, very strong tribe, and they claimed a lot of land all the way into Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. They were big hunters. They were great fighters, and a lot of people would claim that the only reason that the fur trading center of St. Louis became as powerful as it did, as quickly as it did, was because of the great hunting abilities and trading abilities of the Osages and how they were able to make friends and contacts with people like the Choteaus. Illinois Confederacy, that is as many as 17 different tribes that really controlled the Mississippi River at the time. And that would be Miamis, Peorias, Kaskaskias. There was a tribe called the Cahokias, which the ancient city got its name from the Cahokias. And a lot of other tribes made that up too. And they controlled trade on the Mississippi River. So if you're going to go to just 150 years later, the time of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, things had changed quite a bit. And most of that reason is because of the introduction of European Americans. That they had been moving down the Mississippi River, they'd been coming in from the East Coast. Not only were the European Americans kind of a problem, but as they moved inland, they were pushing other tribes from the eastern US into the Midwest, into Missouri, and that upset a lot of different things. The Missourians who were here in the previous slide, they were almost decimated completely by wars with the Sacs and the Foxes in the 1790s. The Osages were still powerful, still in place, but they had moved a little bit away from the Missouri River, and they were down more along the Osage River and then down along the Arkansas River in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And that made room for the Iowas and the Sac and Fox to move down. And then what you see are three new tribes that were not in the previous slide, and they moved further west because of pressure from other tribes and from white settlers further east. The Shawnees and the Delawares were given land by the Spanish in the 1700s around Cape Girardeau. When Spain took over this territory from France in the 1760s, they didn't really have enough people to settle the territory, and so they tried to get as many immigrants in as they could. And the Shawnees and Delawares were willing to leave their homes around Indiana, Ohio, Indiana, or at least some of them were, and they settled around Cape Girardeau. And then the Kickapoos were a people that were from sort of Indiana, Illinois, and there was a group of them who moved into Missouri with the blessing of the Spanish. And what the Spanish really liked about the Shawnees, Delawares, and the Kickapoos is that they created kind of a buffer between the Osages, who could be kind of a problem, when their land was encroached on, and the French and Spanish settlers who lived along the Mississippi River, rather. Okay. So that's sort of who lived here when. I want to get into a little bit of a European view of nature and talk a little bit more about how it differs from the indigenous view of nature. And this is a graphic you've probably seen on the internet, on social media. I think it's called Ego and Echo, but it really works well for this discussion. This would be ego. And the European view of nature is very much a top-down hierarchical pyramid. And on top of that pyramid is man, and you can see women are even one level down. This really comes from sort of, I would say, sort of medieval Christian view of nature. And in the Bible, in Genesis, God tells Abraham to go on to, move out on the land and domesticate the land and use the land for his own needs and his own devices. And that really sets up a hierarchy where you have two-leggeds, whales, you've got your four-leggeds, and then you've got birds, insects, rodents, and you just move on down to, two-cell life, fish, and things like that, where there's a real hierarchy. It's really interesting, you see this in the work of people like Linnaeus, who were doing a taxonomical survey of the natural world, but the survey was definitely from the top down, sort of like a food chain. And then we have the next slide, which is the echo slide, and this is more of an indigenous view of nature. Sometimes you'll hear this phrase "mitakuye oyasin." It's a Lakota phrase, and it means we're all related. Oyasin is sort of a derivative of the word oyate, which is nation, the oyate, the nation. And here things are more in a circle, and there's no real hierarchy, no real differentiation. And this, to me, really captures the way traditional indigenous thinking is that we are all related, we are all part of the same system. None of us is any more important than, the ant is no more important than the man. We all have our place. We all have, a role in the world. So we will go next here. And this is really, even today, evident in, I just happened to pick the seal of the Oto Missouri tribe. First of all, because they used to live here in Missouri, but it really shows what I'm talking about. Um, Indigenous people, if you read their creation stories, you hear them say that they come from different clans, and so here in the Oto Missouri um, flag, you see the Bear Clan, the Eagle Clan, Beaver Clan, Buffalo, Bison Clan, Elk, Owl, Pigeon. And so if somebody knows that they're Bear Clan, for instance, in the old days, the Bear Clan origin stories would say, um, that there was once a time when all the animals, all the creatures, trees, everything in the world could talk to one another. Okay. And at a certain point, the Bear Clan and the Buffalo Clan, which were the two big clans, got together. And they said, life is pretty hard in this world, and maybe things would work better if the two of us could get together. So the Oto Missouri legend says, or oral tradition says, that the Buffalo people, the Bear people, sat down, they smoked their pipes, and they agreed that they would be one nation, that they would unite. Okay. And so all these other clans came in to join them. And what's interesting is the Oto Missouri clans are divided into sky clans. And so that's going to be your Eagle Clan, Pigeon, Owl, and curiously, the Buffalo is part of the Sky Clan too. And then your Earth Clan is going to be the Elk, the Beaver, and the Bear. And so your sky clans and your earth clans were sort of like two sides of the same nation or the same tribe. And so one interesting thing about Chouette culture, the Iowas, the Otos, and the Missourias, is that they would share the leadership. The Bear Clan would be in charge of the tribe for half the year, and the Buffalo Clan would be in charge of the tribe for the other half a year. So it was a way of striking a certain balance between the sky people and the earth people. And what's interesting, even today, I know several people who are, not everybody really knows what clan they came from now because of assimilation, but I know, for instance, a guy who made a hand drum for me a couple of years ago is Buffalo Clan, and he told me he couldn't make a hand drum out of buffalo hide because that's his relatives. So even today, you see people looking back at those origin stories, a time when they were once buffalo, and then when the buffalo over time actually became people. It's a little complicated, but hopefully we can sort of work on that as we move on. Um, and animals really show up in oral tradition. There's a lot of stories, a lot of teaching in indigenous culture goes through oral tradition. And so you have different animals that are assigned different characteristics based on how they interact in nature. So, for example, a crow, I know in Lakota culture is important because it's a protector. Okay, the crow, and the way that the Lakota would explain it to me is that the crow protects our way of life from those who would seek to destroy us. Birds are really kind of interesting too, because in this world, they inhabit the world here where we live, but they can also go up into the sky. And I know someone told me here just a few years ago that the eagle is revered so much because the eagle can fly high up in the sky, and tradition would have it that the eagle is the only bird that has seen a creator. that has looked creator in the face, okay? Snakes are kind of interesting because they inhabit this world, but they also go underground, and so they inhabit the world below. So here again, we have like sky people, earth people, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then I threw Rabbit in. He's one of my favorites, and he is kind of a cultural hero to the Iowa and the Oto and the Missouri because he, you know, you see a rabbit, and usually when you see a rabbit, it's running away from you. But to them, it's a cultural hero because it's an unlikely champion of the common people. Okay, what's more common than a rabbit? Who has, you know, less ferocity than a rabbit? And yet, in some of the oral traditions, the rabbit is the one who outsmarts. For instance, there's a story about the rabbit outsmarts muskrat, who has sold off the human race to animals. It's a long story, but anyway, the rabbit perseveres. So all of these animals, even today in oral tradition, carry important attributes, and you know, they're cultural heroes or cultural anti-heroes, I guess. One thing I think that when we try to think about what nature, indigenous people and nature, we have to kind of think about what it means to be human. And I don't think that we in the 21st century can assume that humans, say living 4 or 5 thousand years ago, thought and acted the way we do. And I just read this really interesting book by Tim Pocketet, who is an archaeologist, and he has done a lot of work in the site of Cahokia. And one of the things that really struck me in his book is he said that we can't really assume that humans were the same in Cahokia 1,000 years ago as they are now. And he says that no one person can be seen as an autonomous individual. People acted as part of an organism almost. I mean, the culture, if you were part of a tribe, you had responsibilities to that tribe, and your responsibilities to the tribe were paramount over your responsibilities to yourself. I mean, it was paramount. What your job was to help the tribe survive, do whatever it took to make that happen. Okay, being a human was not something that was disconnected from being a part of the greater world around you. A lot of people back then believed that inanimate things were alive and that they had souls. And I think one of the most interesting things is people's movements back in those days, Pocketet claims, is that they were coordinated with the movement of other things in the natural world, phenomenon in the natural world, beings in the natural world, on Earth, in the atmosphere, and in the heavens above. And so I made this little drawing. This drawing in the middle was done by my friend Ruben Iron Horse Kent, who's Iowa and Oto. But as far as I can tell from my research, in traditional times, there was no difference between civic life, environment, economy, cultural expression, and spiritual expression. It was all one thing. It all came from the same place. And generally, it came from a spiritual attachment to the environment. Say there's something as simple as making a pot, making pottery. When you are digging up that clay, in tradition, you would be digging up a part of Mother Earth. Okay, so you're making a pot out of your mother, so to speak. And so there's a very spiritual thing. I'm sure that there were prayers that potters had to say. There were songs that only potters knew, and they did that. That, you know, they were very respectful of the clay because it was part of nature. It was part of them. It was part of the body that sustained them. And another thing is that if you were a farmer and you were planting your corn, first of all, most of the people who planted corn 1,000 years ago were women. Only women had that knowledge. There was secret knowledge that had to be employed when you couldn't just go out and plant your corn. First of all, you had to let women from the Buffalo clan go out and plant their corn first. No one could do that until the Buffalo clan did. And that's because in tradition, the story is the Buffalo people brought corn to everyone else. And so women from the Buffalo clan would go out, they would plant their corn, but only after they said the proper prayers, they had the proper ceremony, and they sang the proper songs. Okay, so everything is connected. Everything is an expression of environment, everything is an expression of culture, everything is an expression of the spirit. I like this map because it shows a worldview, kind of shows how Indigenous people saw the world. It's easy to kind of see how the way they saw the world is different from the way we saw the world. Now, actually, this map is only less than 200 years old, and there was an Iowa leader named Nohart, and he had to go with some of his other council members to Washington and argue about who owned some land with the Sac and Fox. But to me, this is just a fascinating map. It's what it is it's a map of the Midwest. And so this line that goes up here is the Mississippi River, okay? This line is the Missouri River. And I pointed out some different spots that kind of help you get your bearings here. But when you think about it, the way they understood the world, and what's kind of amazing is how accurate this map really is. Okay, the maps, or rather the rivers and the streams, were the highways of that time. And so, if you're leaving what's now St. Louis, you're going up the Missouri River. You're going to hit the Gasconade. You're going to hit the Osage. You're going to hit further up the this is going to be the Grand River. Sheraton River is this one. This is each of these little things that look like chocolate chip cookies on the map are village sites, Iowa village sites. And basically what this is 200 years of movements of the nation, okay? And they drew this map to show the Sac and Fox that, well, no, you don't really own this land because we've been here longer than you, okay? And then all of these little things that look like ant trails from one cookie to the other, one village to the other, those are migration patterns. But to me, I just love this map because it shows a way of thinking about space, thinking about nature, thinking about the environment that is just so much different from our own. Okay, this kind of gets back to some of the things that I was talking about earlier, and it's a really complicated picture, and I can't even pretend to understand everything that's going on here, but I will do my best. So earlier in my talk, I was talking about basically three worlds, okay? There's this world in the middle. This is the world we inhabit. You can see there's ground here, there's a tree, and then there's, I suppose, something that is like a root that goes down. This is the thing, this is the portal. This tree is the portal that connects our world here with the upper world. Okay, this is the sky. You see here's Birdman. You see here there are storm clouds that are thunderbirds. They've got lightning coming out of their mouths, okay? Storms with lightning and thunder would be linked to the thunderbirds, and a lot of times about this time of year, or maybe a little earlier than this time of year, when that first thunderstorm came through and you heard those thunder beings for the first time of the year, that's when spring started. That's when the indigenous spring officially began, or I'm sorry, that's when the indigenous new year began, is when you heard those first thunderers. And some people still celebrate it at this time. You go a little further up into the heavens and you start to get into your mystical beings. I'm not sure who this guy is, but this is Birdman. And Birdman is a Mississippian deity that we have in common with Mesoamerica. And he's an interesting guy because he's part man, so he can be on this level of the world. But because he's part bird, he can be up in this new world up above. You have the star people, of course, up here, all kinds of other things. And then there's the world below. You see a fish swimming. I've been trying to figure out, and as far as I can tell, this guy here is a turtle, and he's got a face, a human face painted on his shell. I can't tell you exactly what what the significance of that is, but this is the underworld. Okay, this is the world below. This is a kind of a dark, a little more sinister world. Here you see serpents. Serpents are, while Birdman can live on this world and he can go above, like I talked about the snakes earlier, they can live on this world, but they can also go down below. Okay, you see, these are like rattlesnakes, really rattlesnakes from hell. They've got the horns, but they've got the rattles. Okay, and this thing here is the Milky Way. It's called the Path of Souls. And so when you die, you make this journey, okay, on the Path of Souls. And I'm going to have a hard time remembering if you start here and go up, or if you go up and you go down. Anyway, it's after everyone leaves this earth, it's the journey that we make in the Milky Way. And then this tree is the thing that connects it all together. It's the portal. And so even today, if you go to a Sundance, and you'll see a tree in the middle of the circle, and then the Sundancers will tether themselves to this tree. All right. So even today, a lot of this mythology comes together, but it's really fascinating to me because it again, kind of like the oral tradition we talked about earlier, it shows animals, some mythical beings, but they they have characteristics of the animals that are observable, and yet they're mythical. And this guy I want to point out here, I believe, is the underwater panther, and we're going to talk a little bit about him. He's a being that lives and kind of controls the underworld. Yeah, here he is. Ishcheki is the Iowa Oto Missouri word for the underwater panther, and he shows up a lot in cave paintings. This is in Picture Cave in Warren County. He shows up in pottery. This is a little better drawing, a little easier to see of this cave painting. And then he shows up in pottery here. Underwater panther he lives in the rivers. Rivers and springs and caves are portals. Mostly caves and springs would be the portals that would allow people to go from our world down into the underworld. And then there's tons and tons of stories about people who went in the other underworld and had confrontations with the underwater panther, and he lived with all the other underwater deities, and sometimes he would capture people. So if somebody say drowned in the river, then the story would be, well, the underwater panther got him. It's kind of an interesting looking character. He's got this almost looks like a comic figure, but he's got these nasty looking teeth, and then he's got antlers, okay, deer antlers, and then he's got these ear bobs or earplugs that were worn at the time. So he's kind of a mix of a lot of different animals, but he is the ruler of the underworld. And then you have the Thunderbird. We saw the Thunderbirds in that drawing of the Mississippian culture. This is a symbol you see a lot, and it's even, as you see in the seal of the Menominee Nation, which is from Wisconsin. Here's a Thunderbird carved in a wall in Wisconsin. This is from the Great Lakes, a hide from the Great Lakes. So the Thunderbirds, typically, they come from the West, and sometimes this time of year you see those big old dark thunderstorms coming from the West. And how quickly they can move and how black they can be, and how violent they can be. And so the Thunderbird is associated with those storms. And of course, like I said earlier, the Thunderbird can live in our world, but also the Thunderbird, because it has the ability to fly, can go to the world above. Here's Cahokia. If you haven't been here, boy, you really need to go. It's an amazing place. This is a picture up here that I took last fall when we visited. This is Monk's Mound. So Cahokia was the huge city, as I said earlier. It's from the greater metropolitan area, which extended all the way to St. Louis, had as many as 20,000 people. Okay, this is what you would call downtown Cahokia. There was a huge game court here, a plaza. There was there were these huge mounds. Excuse me. The flat-topped mounds were ceremonial mounds, and now people think that maybe these buildings were sweat lodges, and where you would go up on top of the mound and purify yourself with sweat baths, which of course people still do today. Interestingly, you see these poles, and way over here you can see what's called wood hinge. This has something to do with the tree that I showed you in the previous slide of Mississippian cosmology. This is the pole that sort of connects the upper world and the lower world to our world. The whole city was laid out really quickly, and it was laid out very purposefully, and it was completely, we think, laid out in a ceremonial, for a ceremonial purpose. And here's a couple theories about it. Some people think that Cahokia, and here you can see this is downtown St. Louis on Mississippi River. So there were over 20 mounds in downtown St. Louis. There were mounds in East St. Louis, and you can see the mounds kind of trailed all the way to Cahokia. And I think this is a distance of about 8 miles. So some people hypothesize that Cahokia was built where it was because it was around so much water. So you see there's bodies of water, there's marshlands, there's rivers, there's lakes. And if you know anything about the geology, definitely of the St. Louis area, it sits on karst, which is, St. Louis is full of caves. Okay, so some people theorize that because of that, Cahokia was built where it was because it was so close to all of these portals to the underworld, okay, to the caves, and to the water. Now, other people theorize, this is something I just ran across this week, and I've never really seen it before, but I've heard people talk about it. Some people theorize that the map of Cahokia, and the map is seen in these purple dots are all mounds, and this person put together a map of Cahokia, and this person theorizes that actually the mounds of Cahokia were a map of the stars. And so there you've got that connection again with the world above. I don't know if either of these is correct. Maybe they're both correct, but what we do definitely know is that Cahokia was put together very quickly, in less than 100 years. It was put together. It was an amazing, public works project because it was put together purposefully and with something very particular in mind. And this is my last slide of the kind of the underworld and the underworld and the above world. This is Blake Mound, and it's out in Chesterfield, Missouri. And there's a guy named Mark Leach who's been doing a lot of work on this. And something that has just been sort of brought to my attention recently is that oftentimes where you will see burial mounds, and this is really typical of a burial mound, it'll be on a bluff. This bluff happens to overlook the Missouri River Valley in Chesterfield. But look down, okay, so this is not a ceremonial mound. This was a burial mound where someone was interred at some point. But look down here, there's a cave. And it's been brought to my attention that in a lot of cases, even here in Boone County, where you see burial mounds on bluffs, you will see caves down below. And so again, you have that connection with the world above and the world below. So I have tried to kind of give you, I know this has been kind of a meandering talk, and it didn't really dwell on specifics about different animals, but what I've really tried to give you is sort of a sense of a worldview that is so much different from our own. And really, we know so little about it at this time, but we're learning more all the time. And so I was really hoping to kind of explore a little bit what makes our world different from the world of those who came before us. And I always like to end this my talks with this slide. This is a work of art by Nicholas Galanin, and it's based off of the Hollywood sign up in Hollywood Hills. But wherever you are, you're on Indian land. So with that, I am really done with my, Dana, with my prepared remarks, and I'm ready to turn it over if anybody's got questions or anything.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you. That was great.
We do have some questions. Let's see.
All right.
Teresa asks, beginner level question. She says, what is the distinction between the great Osages and little Osages?
Okay, good question. Very little, actually. You know, when I talked earlier about clans, the Osages were a group that were divided into several clans. And the clan that became the Little Osages tended to kind of live away from the rest of the tribe. And the fact that they were called Little Osages is basically simply a translating error by the French. And so whatever the real name of that group was got somehow garbled into Little Osages. And so that's who they became to the Europeans. And so if you're going to have Little Osages, well, then the other group, they must be the Great Osages. So they are part of the same nation, although they would be different clans. And the fact that they have the names is just kind of a mess. European loss, something that was lost in translation. But yeah, it's confusing. Yeah.
Greg, Laura asks, this is a great question. How did indigenous land control / territory differ from land ownership as we know it today and as imposed during colonization?
Well, no one, my understanding is that indigenous people didn't own land. They had no concept of owning land. This is kind of a slim distinction, but they controlled land. And so if you were strong enough to, say, control the state of Iowa, that meant that you had enough people that you could, you could keep anybody else out of there, okay, that you were a strong enough nation. So for instance, the Osages had a huge area that they controlled with exclamation points, because they had the power to do that. And if anybody wanted to come in and hunt, they had to ask Osages permission. And if they tried to come in and hunt without their permission, they were chased off. So so it was not really, I mean, they didn't have any kind of understanding of that this is land we own. That was a foreign concept to them, but it was land that they interacted with. It was land that they farmed, land that the animals on that land were animals that they knew, and they believed that. There's an interesting story when the Osages in the, I think it was the 1808 treaty or the 1825 treaty, when they finally were forced to leave Missouri, they mourned for decades because they had been forced away from this land, and they had been forced to abandon the animals that they felt Wakanda had given them. And so, not only that, but a lot of their dead were buried there. And even today now, the Osages are coming back into Missouri to buy land where their ancestors are buried. So it has more to do with like a space you can control rather than land that you own that no one else can use. It's kind of a slim distinction, but that seems to be the best way I can describe it. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Greg, Robin asks on the Missourian cosmology picture, why is the woman at the very bottom?
Let's go back and take a look. Oh, this one? Is this the one? I wonder if this is the one here, this woman down here. And this may be a woman called the Evening Star. there's the evening star and the morning star, and that's the only, hopefully this is the one she was talking about. And she was kind of also sort of a corn, um, a mother, the mother of agriculture. Why she's down here, I can't explain to you, but I think that's the best I can explain.
It looks like Sherry, I hope I'm pronouncing that rightly, asks, many of the mounds were destroyed when the Europeans came. I'm aware of a few outside of the park at Cahokia, but have more survived intact in the St. Louis area.
There were about 25 mounds in St. Louis. I mean, and there were mounds in Forest, where Forest Park is now. And then there are mounds that still exist, like the one I showed you at Blake Mound out in Chesterfield. I think there are several out there. In downtown St. Louis, south of downtown, there is one mound that is left, and the Osages purchased that mound in 2009. It's called Sugarloaf Mound. There was a house built on it, and they tore the house down. And I don't really think they have plans to develop it. I think it's just something that they wanted to preserve and just for now, just make sure nothing more happens to it, because all of the other mounds in St. Louis were torn down, including if you go on I-70 right before you get to the Mississippi River, if you look off to the south, there's this big, huge boulder, and the boulder marks the site where something called Big Mound used to be, which was the largest of the mounds. But other than Sugarloaf Mound, they've all been torn down.
Greg, I'm going to skip a couple questions ahead in the Q&A just because it is another question about this particular slide.
Okay.
Linda asks, the Mississippian cosmology map drawings appears to have symbols found in Mesoamerica, i.e. Aztecs, the Quetzalcoatl drawing. Do you know of any possible migrations that would explain this?
Yeah,
Wow.
that is something that comes up a lot now. And actually, this book that I mentioned earlier by Tim Pocketet, The Gods of Thunder, here's the title, and the author right there talks all about that. And so he and other archaeologists have recently, I mean, people have thought about this for a long time. They've noticed how the drawings and the deities are similar, and only recently have people actually admitted, well, it could have happened. And so Pocketet has this theory that, much like any spiritual leader would go off and study and learn the ceremonies and learn the songs, that there were quite a few people from this part of the country, the Mississippians, the Caddoans down in Oklahoma, traveled to Mesoamerica, where they learned the ceremonies, they learned the deities, they learned the iconography, and brought a lot of it back. And so more and more archaeologists are thinking that there was a pretty tight connection between the Mississippian culture and Mesoamerica. And yeah, that's why you see Birdman. Birdman is definitely a Mesoamerican deity. In fact, they
Wow.
still do this thing where it's a pole. It's a little bit like Sundance, and maybe you've seen it on YouTube, where there are people dressed in the Birdman costumes, and they tie a rope to themselves, and then they swing down this huge pole. It's so yeah, definitely there's a linkage there.
Greg, we've got a couple questions that are a little bit similar to each other. So I'm going to read them both out. Where did the
Okay.
Missourian tribes go? They seem to have just disappeared. And then someone else asks, do any of the tribes that you've spoken of still exist?
Yeah, they all do. The Ioways, which I spoke about, they have a reservation in Kansas and Nebraska, and then there's another group of them in Oklahoma. Missourians and Oto Missourians are together now, and they live in Red Rock, Oklahoma, as their reservation. Sac and Fox have 3 different locations. There's a group that lives in Iowa, in Tama, Iowa. Pardon me. There's a group that lives next to the Ioways on the Kansas-Nebraska border, and then there's a group of Sac and Fox in Oklahoma. And then most of the other nations that used to live here, Kickapoos, Shawnees, Delawares, live in Oklahoma because they were forced to live there. I think that one of the things, it's taken me a long time to figure this out, to really realize this, but the people didn't really disappear. Okay, they were forced out of Missouri. They were forced out of most of the eastern states and into Oklahoma, but they're still around. Okay, Missouri made it illegal to be a Native person in the state without written permission from a government Indian agent after 1839. And so what that did is it forced the big groups of indigenous people to move out of the state, but there were still thousands of individual Indians lived here and stayed in Missouri. And today there's, I think, 27,000 indigenous people still living in the state. So nobody really got wiped out, so to speak. I mean, one of the things I really learned in working on my book was that how resilient despite, oh my God, for 300, 400 years, 500 years, we've been trying to kill these people off, and they're resilient. And most of them, sure, they're decimated in number, and many of them are assimilated, and many of them live, they're not what you would call ethnically pure. They've mixed with other tribes and with Europeans, but I'm just amazed at how resilient they are, and how they still retain kind of, most tribes, or some tribes still have kind of a surprising amount of their culture. Some tribes have lost a lot, but some, and those who've lost a lot are adopting ways of other nations, other tribes. So the one thing that really I come away with in this years and years of studying this is just how resilient. They're still here, and they're still practicing their culture. It's different than it was. It's just like they're not bears and buffaloes anymore. They're people that look like us, but they still maintain their culture.
Greg, somewhat related question. Everett asks, were Native Americans as warring before the Europeans invaded their land, or was this warring mostly caused by the European invasion?
There was definitely fighting before Europeans. One thing I hear about Europeans say, white people say a lot, is that we, meaning white people, didn't do anything to indigenous people that they weren't already doing to each other, which is completely false. But I mean, there was, there was slavery, indigenous slavery, there was indigenous wars. Generally, the wars would be over territory. Remember how I said you could claim a territory as long as you could control it, but a lot of times there were battles over who could control what sort of territory. But when Europeans came, the nature of that warring kind of changed, and as we came and put added pressure, added stress on indigenous tribes, then I think it became a little worse and a little more. It put pressure. We kind of were good at pitting tribes against each other at a certain point. But it definitely existed before Europeans came here.
Greg, we have a couple of, I guess you might say, iconographic related questions here. Could you go I think it's one slide up, the cosmology.
Okay. Oops.
2 slides, I guess. Yep. Kyla asked, what is the thing to the right of the Birdman? What are we looking at on the right of Birdman?
Oh, this thing here. I have no idea. They look like, little skulls or something, but I have no idea what that is. I'm sorry.
If you don't know, if you don't know, then then we don't know.
Somebody knows. Somebody knows. Yeah.
And also another sort of related question, is the Thunderbird fashioned after any particular natural bird?
Probably it'd be more like a bird of prey. So it'd be more like I don't know if it'd be an eagle, but it's definitely, bird with like the hook beak and the big talons. It's meant to be a threatening bird because it's a bird that has power of life and death. But so it would be a bird of prey, but I've never really seen it depicted as a specific bird. It's more like an idealized kind of bird. Mean looking bird, yeah. I might say that this comes from, I should pull the book out. I've got it right here, but it comes from a book about Cahokia. And I think it's called something about the ancient Midwest. And it's a book about Cahokia's past. It's a book again by Tim Pocketet and another woman who edited it. And so I borrowed the drawing from that. And so if you're really interested, I think if you can get a hold of a copy of that book, it would do a far better job of explaining it than I would.
Linda suggests maybe the figures on the right are souls of the departed, since they're towards the end of the Milky Way that you described
Yeah,
earlier. And we have one more question about this drawing.
good
What is
guess.
the
Yeah, good.
the hand pointing down? I think we're looking on the left-hand side at the
This is
top of the
something you
Milky
see.
Way.
Yeah, this is something you see a lot. And again, I should know what this is, but I would direct. There's a book called Hawk Hero Open Hand, and it was, some of you may have seen it. It was a Mississippian art show that I know was probably 10, 15 years ago. It was at the St. Louis Art Museum. But I know in that book they will describe that iconography for sure. And again, do it in a much better way than I would. Yeah, and I'm noticing now too that this path of souls, I think that that's a good guess about souls, because I'm noticing now that the Milky Way goes all the way around. So this could be souls starting. I know sometimes they'll say that after a person passes away, it takes them a year to make this journey on the Milky Way, and then they go to be a spirit in the upper world. So they're maybe just starting their journey, and then they'll come around and they'll be up here.
Greg, Kathy Sue asks, what crops, if any, did Missourians grow, or what native plants were key to survival? That's probably a whole class.
Yeah.
Itself.
There
That's a
again,
great question.
there's another book that I highly recommend if you're really interested in this, by Gail Fritz, who teaches at Washington University in St. Louis, and it's called Feeding Cahokia. And she talks about the origin of agriculture in this area and how it was sort of accidental. You know, the way agriculture started is garbage, plants would start growing out of dump pits where different, rinds and gourds and things would get dumped, and then they noticed plants would grow. And so at the height of Cahokia, corn was a big thing. People were master corn planters and corn farmers. And of course, because Cahokia was so big, the sphere of influence spread out probably in a 50-mile radius from Cahokia, and there were cornfields all over. So that was a big crop. I know there were different kinds of weeds, different goosefoot, sumpweed, grains, things that had what you call sort of greasy grains, because they had a lot of calories and things in them. And then, of course, a lot of hunting. Gourds, though, I think were probably the first crop to be domesticated in this part of the country. And the interesting thing about corn, and probably a lot of you know this, and I didn't know it before, but corn wouldn't exist if it weren't for people, because we have bread corn. Originally, corn was just, comes from Mexico, and it was just a little tiny cob that had, hard little ears. And it was a crop that was originally, I think, harvested because you could make alcohol out of the sweet stuff in the stem. But over, and if it wasn't for humans, it's a plant that does not grow every year. We have to plant it, and over the millennia, we've bred it into the different kinds of corn that we have today. So that in itself is a great story.
It looks like we're going to end with a bird-related question, which is, I think, appropriate, and it also relates back to, I believe, the discussion of the Mesoamerican connection.
Okay.
Jamie asks, Could I donate macaw feathers and other feathers? Would this be something any clans or tribes use for ceremony? And there's some federal laws on our native birds on that particular topic, but
right. I don't know any of the tribal traditions in this part of the country that we'd use those. Those it seems to me to be the kind of thing more you'd be seeing in Mexico and Mesoamerica. Generally, here in this part of the country, at least in ceremonies I've been to, everything that is used in ceremony tends to come from the immediate area. And that's another way that Indigenous people relate to the land. You know, it's like sage, sweetgrass. Feathers would come from birds that come from this area, you know, eagle feathers, hawk feathers, things like that. So, but I don't know of anyone other than maybe in some powwow regalia or something. I don't know.
Greg, it is my understanding, and this may be totally incorrect, that Indigenous peoples today are allowed to have feathers and other bird parts for ceremonial purposes, but I mean, we generally are not. It's not legal for us to possess native bird feathers.
No, and well, definitely eagle feathers, you know, but and things like that. But and not only that, but I think you have to be an enrolled tribal member. So if you are, say, Cherokee, but for some reason you are not enrolled and you don't have your card, you're out of luck. You're not supposed, you know, you're not really supposed to have that stuff either. But that's a federal regulations.
Stemming from the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So, but macaw feathers are legal to possess since they're not native to this country.
Are they? Okay. Yeah.
Is my understanding.
That seems like the kind of thing that that, you know, perhaps would show up in like a powwow regalia because it's fancier, you know, and like a fancy dance outfit or something. But
okay, we have exhausted the Q&A. I'm going to check the chat here.
Well, I'm sorry that I'm a little unclear on some of this stuff. That's what I get for diving into something I don't completely know about. But those are good questions, and definitely something that, you know, people might want to go and research on their own.
I do not see any questions. I do see a lot of compliments and thanks to you, Greg.
Well, thank you.
Very
I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Great presentation. Okay.
Yeah, a presentation like this is really helpful because it, you know, it kind of helps you have to think through all of these things. And so, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share my limited knowledge with you.
No, wonderful food for thought. Great.
Thank
All
you.
right. If there's no more questions, we'll let everybody go. And Greg, many thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.